being resolved, we still very much do have an issue with ferries in terms of particularly well-skilled skippers. So earlier this year, you would have heard about the industry program where there was a good deal of collaboration to how we could improve the industry. So in terms of improving terms and conditions and wages for ferry crew, look at the training regime and look at obviously the immigration settings at the time. So there has been substantial work done then. One of the other things that was highlighted at the time was perhaps a necessity in order to do a planned reduction of ferry services to bring back firstly the reliability to the services that are planned to run, but also to allow fleet and crew to be allocated to the training program so that they can be accelerated. Ferry has obviously got a considerably higher sort of training regime than what we have for bus drivers. So for a skipper, as an example, it is 4 to 7 years, and most of that is actually time on the water. So we are now at the point where we do need to do a planned reduction in order to accelerate that training program. We also received notification from Fuller's on the 1st of August that they were withdrawing their services from Bayswater, Birkenhead and Northcote. So they were on a short-term contract and that had been rolled. There was obviously the idea that we would potentially look to re-procure services for those services, which is exactly what we're doing. So we do hope that we'll be in a position to be able to update next week that we will have replacement ferry services for those 3 routes. So that's Bayswater, Birkenhead and Northcote. It may not be on the exact timetable we have because it is a short tenure of contract, but that is absolutely what we're working towards. The other 2 impacted routes are Gulf Harbour and Half Moon Bay. So that means what we call an interpeak suspension of services for those. So that is between 10 a.m. and 2 p.m. Now, look, I'm absolutely aware that there is currently bus replacements running on some of those other trips, so we're looking for absolute clarity on what that timetable is going to be. It also means that services after 8 p.m. on those 2 routes will not run, as well Half Moon Bay on the weekends. So whilst that is not great news, it will help fast track that acceleration of program to be able to get up to absolute full requirements, and 14 to 18 months is what they're currently thinking. There is no absence of new people entering the industry, but the gap right now is those well-experienced skippers that can be deployed. So the 7 to 10 year in terms of experience that they're looking for. They are recruiting internationally. They have had people arrive. So those that come with qualifications abroad only takes approximately 6 to 9 months to get them skilled and accredited for New Zealand marine standards to be able to have them out on the water. So that is a real big focus in terms of what they're doing. The changes in terms of those planned service reductions, as well as ideally the replacement of the other ferry services, will occur on the 1st of October. So we have had some awareness over the last couple of days with impacted councillors in the areas where these ferries do service, and we have a comprehensive sort of communications plan on that. We will be providing regular updates in terms of how many training hours have occurred in each period, so that we're getting that reporting so that we have confidence that the accelerated training program is working and we can see the benefit to the crewing out on our services in due course. That's, I guess, about that one. Thank you.
Chair, can I just check in? We've given quite a bit of information, and my question of you is, would you like to take a few questions and then we just complete the performance metrics, which includes safety? So we can pause, take questions, or we can continue. I'll take guidance from you.
How long will this last section take, do you think, Dean?
Just a few minutes.
Well, let's just finish it off. We've got a whole lot of questions, so we can answer them all in a one, I think.
I'm sure. That's good. That's good. I just wanted to check in first. And I'm going to take all of this as read, so that's probably a very helpful way of us accelerating. You'll see, this is the last time you'll see this slide. This is performance metric measurement against the last statement of intent. You've got a paper before you today to approve our next one, and we'll be reporting on that on a quarterly basis from here on in. But here you can see in plain terms what we've achieved, what we've been there or thereabouts on, and where we haven't been able to deliver on previously agreed targets. I'm just taking that as read. You can see what's happening here through the public transport patronage and our metrics. In general terms, all the trends are going in the right direction, which is very pleasing. We have the usual ups and downs. We've got an SOI target for this year of 83.4 million. We're projecting to be there or thereabouts at this stage. That's on an annualised basis. Our aspiration is month on month, later this year, early next year, and I want to emphasise the month on month to be clicking over at circa 100 million passenger movements, okay? But the annualised, or the annual average takes longer to get there just because we need time to build that. You'll see staffing levels have improved significantly. You'll see here bus reliability has been improving. 2% aren't hitting our reliability targets. That's up significantly from where it was last year, 86%. And increased reliability through those morning and afternoon peak services. So things are moving in the right direction there. And a similar story on ferries and trains. So obviously Tahuia has affected some of that reliability, but we've got pretty good statistics there. We continue to work on those, of course, particularly the train challenges. You'll see here what's happening on the rolling average. We touched on this before with public transport overall and that reliability. So I'll take those as read, but the trend lines are heading in the direction that we would expect them to. We'd all like them to steepen up in the right direction, but that is good direction. I'll now hand over to Stacey just to pick up on performance metrics around safety.
Sorry. In terms of transport safety, currently, this is the 12 months ending July, is 669 deaths and serious injuries have been reported on our roads across Tamaki Makaurau. 58 lives were lost and 611 have been seriously injured. In terms of some of those trends that we're seeing, the largest crash movement growths were in side impact and head-on crashes, and that's grown by 32% in the year. So what that may mean is, and potentially when it comes to the side impact sort of scenario, is that people taking more risky behaviour and taking chances and turning out of roads, and that's sort of representative of what we're seeing in the stats once we sort of dig into it a little bit more. For motorcyclists, that is the biggest DSI increase was due to overtaking. So again, that would represent more in terms of potentially the driving behaviours that we're seeing. And in terms of year to date, it is from January to July. When we look at that against the prior year, that is a 20% year-on-year increase with DSIs and fatalities actually, which is obviously pretty grim news when it comes to what's happening on our roads out there. In terms of the local board view, in the last 12 months, just under 50% of injuries have occurred in 6 local board areas, and I think this is pretty representative of what we've seen the last few times as well. There has been what I would call some pretty startling increases, and so when you look at that on where the local boards are broken down, you can see there's like a 400% increase in terms of fatalities in the Howick local board area, and there's also a substantive increase in the Henderson area as well. So these are the type of things we're sort of trying to understand more and why, and look at on a local level about what needs to be done and what interventions are needed. We're obviously getting a lot more information coming through with our data than we've ever had before, which is enabling better conversations with our road safety partners as well, so that we can help them understand that and sort of look at more targeted interventions where appropriate. In terms of, I did want to touch on about Vision Zero and the sort of funding challenge. Now, this is more about our SOI target, and so the current DSI targets have been reviewed from what we've have put in historically, and they've been re-baselined on the current performance. Now, that's got a lot to do with obviously that forward capital projection and what we're actually doing with what I would call infrastructure interventions versus other things. So that has been re-baselined to be a bit more realistic, but also to be able to have year-on-year improvement to still reach what we need to do by 2050 as per our existing goals. It has obviously the cost to deliver interventions is substantially scaled up, and also our future budgets for these interventions have come down. That doesn't mean that we don't have other levers, and I really do want to stress that point. There's many other levers in the Road to Zero sort of portfolio that have had a substantive amount of work done on them. So whether that be the drug testing part, or whether it be looking at fines and penalties, AT have done considerable work on that to try and support that being reviewed. So there's a number of other things that are underway other than what we would call what people ask of AT in terms of those infrastructure changes to occur on our roads. But that is when you see why that SOI target has been changed. It's because it's unrealistic right now. And right now we cannot achieve in the current projection based on the level of investment and based on the level of what I would call as meaty decision making to make some of these other levers happen and get across the line to make substantive change. Thanks.
Yeah, thank you. That's the end of our presentation. Can I just acknowledge Wayne Donnelly, our chair, is also with us. Yeah, thank you.
And I see board member Jadaram there too. Welcome, Ravine. Not unsurprisingly, folks, we have a big swag of people lining up to ask questions. Just help the meeting if we could endeavour to keep those questions as succinct as possible, please. That would be much appreciated. So we have first batch, Councillors Turner, Fletcher, Newman, Simpson and Darby. It's about half of them. Okay, Councillor Turner.
Thank you very much. Thank you for the presentation. Hard to keep up with a tag team of information like that. My first question, seeing that the funding for infrastructure problems, etc., has stretched so far, have you stopped building speed humps, and if not, why?
I just refer members to that slide there.
Okay, thank you. Question 2, has your slip data identified block drains and lack of maintenance as one of the causes?
Can I just clarify, block drains and maintenance of our road service and network and the impact on safety?
Yeah, but impact on slips, etc., on your road network.
Oh, yes, thank you. Yep, Kathy.
Thank you. Certainly a lot of the slips that happened on our rural network were associated with channel drainage and drainage down steep slopes. So not specifically catch pits, for example, or blocked culverts, but more associated with the drainage network in that rural space and water pouring down slopes. Thank you.
That's good to hear. Question 3, just 2 more, Mr. Chair. Traffic, when you talked about your maintenance contracts, you know, in September 22, Ventia was awarded a $220 million contract for 5 years with a right to renewal for another 5 years. Is it historical, that stuff you gave us about the contracts going out to tender and being renegotiated?
What I was referring to is exactly what you just mentioned, which was the last 2 years we have retendered competitively all of our contracts, and we haven't directly negotiated or offered any. So Ventia would have won one of those in whenever you said 2022, yeah.
And does Auckland Transport have its own staff going around measuring outcomes?
We have our own staff going around doing quality monitoring and quality assessments, not necessarily on every single piece of work because that would be significant duplication, but yes, we have a regime to go out there and monitor.
Okay, thank you. And the last one, just a comment if I could, Mr. Chair, if you go back to slide 10, you'll see that our drain is pictured with rocks and an eel going up it, and I think that's part of our problem why we have flooding our drains are not biodiversity areas, they are for stopping flooding in our urban areas. Thanks.
Hey, thanks, Councillor Turner. Councillor Fletcher?
My goodness, what a comprehensive report to us, and there are so many issues that I want to deep dive into, but I'm aware there'll be a lot of questions. My question specifically relates to the work that's going on around grade separation in the CRL, but before I pose that question, may I congratulate you, as was done earlier, on the superb way you enhanced our reputation with the management around Eden Park and the games that were held. It was fantastic. I also want to acknowledge the chair, because I know he interrogated you pretty heavily to make sure that that was all going to be managed in a seamless way. But if you please acknowledge to those specific staff members just our gratitude for the way in which everything happened effortlessly. So we've got the CRL coming up, and we know that CRL Limited is only really looking at the tunnels and the construction of the CRL itself. It's not looking at the functionality and what is going to be required to optimise operation going forward. I want to know the specific work that you're doing, the numbers of grade separations that are going to be required in the short term, and what the costs associated with those are going to be, because I think that is going to be quite a formidable challenge to our council, and it's also an area that I know that the Mayor is very keen to advance with central government.
Thank you, Councillor. I can briefly respond to that. I think we've had a request to present at the next TIC on the actual level crossing programme, so we can provide all the detail there. But in summary, so we've also been working on a draft day one timetable, rail timetable for CRL opening. That does create some safety issues across the network with regards to level crossings. In particular, the amount of time the barrier arms could be down. So we've just literally completed an updated safety impact assessment across the whole network for every single individual crossing to confirm the work that had previously been done, and that has been submitted to the rail regulator for review. We're expecting a response from them within 6 weeks, which will confirm our expectations around what day one is required. At the moment, we have a programme of work for day one, which is what we call the group one of level crossings, if you like. There's 6 pedestrian level crossings there which we believe need to be grade separated or closed for safety reasons, and those are the ones that are currently out for consultation in the community around, in particular, the alternative walking routes for those pedestrian crossings and whether they're acceptable for the community, and whether we need to do some safety upgrade works for those alternative pedestrian routes to improve the amenity. There is one road crossing which we believe needs to be closed as well for day one. So 6 pedestrian, 1 road crossing. Then we're into the rest of the 54 level crossings across the network, which there is a very high level programme at this point. We don't believe any of those absolutely require day one closure. But again, that safety impact assessment is currently being reviewed by the regulator to confirm that. But our view is that those 48 odd crossings that are not to be grade separated or closed for level one, for day one, will need to be closed at some point over the next 20 years or so. And as train frequencies increase further, as we meet the expectations in the CRL business plan, and to achieve the benefits for increased train frequencies. But again, we can go into the high-level timing around those 48 or so crossings over the next 10 to 20 years, and our expectations around that and how it's linked to train frequencies.
Thank you for that, and I'm sure that it will be helpful to have a much more in-depth presentation. But for the moment, where there's a lot of work as we move our way forward, can you give us any indication of what you might have advanced forward in terms of the Mayor's integrated transport plan? Any indications of costs prior to what we're going to see with elections coming up?
In terms of the day one closures, which is the 6 pedestrians plus 1 road, and there's some other works to, for example, just complete, and we're nearly there, the pedestrian crossing gates, automatic gates across the network. So there's a number of other minor initiatives that we're progressing as well. Please don't quote me on this, but I think over the next 2 years, there's something like 70 million in the budget to complete that day one work. And that's obviously been prioritised as CRL day one requirements. Beyond that, like I say, we're still really working through the 5 to 20 year view of what needs to be done and in what order. But if you look at Melbourne, who've had a similar or ongoing doing a similar piece of work, we are in the $1 to $2 to $3 billion in terms of if you had to grade separate every single crossing.
Thank you for that. Can you also explain what you will be doing by way of communication with those affected communities, even in the short term? Because I think there is not a high level of awareness of this work that will need to be undertaken.
Yes, as I've said, for the day one crossings, which will need to be grade separated or closed in the next 2 years, we are undertaking specific local engagement with those communities now. But we will, as we finalise with the rail regulator the longer term view over the next 2 to 3 months, we will need to undertake a broader communication campaign, absolutely, yeah.
Thank you, Mark.
Councillor Newman?
Previous mayor signed up to a 22-23 statement of intent that included what I thought was a pretty ruinous decision. The measure for the sealed local road network was dropped to only 5.5%, way too low. By that modest measure, I thought we could hit that. We're not even close. We hit 4.6%. The gap was 64 kilometres just in terms of that very, very inadequate target. Now we're talking about going, I mean, I guess what I want to know first and foremost is how much further behind are we falling the presentation of your information about the local sealed road network, and what is the cost of that going to be? Because this problem appears to be getting far worse, not better. And then I've got a number of other questions on that.
Thank you, Councillor Newman. I don't think either Mark or I have the specific numbers on that. We'll take that question away, and feel free, if we've got detailed questions like that in general terms, to email them through to us so we can come prepared. In general terms, and I talked about this specifically at the last committee, we are seeing through an enduring underinvestment in our transport networks, in particular our road networks. We're seeing condition ratings go down. We're seeing complaints go up. The investment's gone down. So all our metrics are going in the wrong direction, which is why this discussion around reallocating capital for maintenance and renewal is so important. So welcome the focus, and we'll give you the answers more specifically on local roads.
Why would I be asked to find you the $50 million for your shortfall for new capex and a cycling program when I'm seeing targets like that? 5.5% not met, you're only about 86% of that very modest target. That to me is what the community sees ahead of new capex that you're talking about. I want to understand why I'm being asked for new funding in that space when it's demonstrably clear that you're not hitting the targets based on that current core asset for which has not been renewed.
So I think there's a couple of things here, and it's fair comment or fair challenge. We get the equal and opposite challenge from other members around this table around why aren't we completing those cycling and walking networks. And my challenge back to you, and we've had this discussion before, is that you essentially make the funding prioritisation decisions, and at this stage we're giving you advice and we're giving other councillors advice on allocation of that funding and where the gaps are. It feels like we're trying to move a limited amount of capital around an ever-increasing set of demands. And we've been very plain about that, but you can't have maintenance on your road networks complete a whole range of small to medium-sized projects and expect us to do that with no funding in the middle. And so I'm pushing back not on you, councillor, but on the principle. We will always, of trying to do everything and not address the core funding issue. And that's not just council, that's government as well. So, look, it's a difficult challenge, and it's one that we are putting to you. It's a funding question. Then we will look at allocating and prioritising. Sorry, Mark, you got something you want to add?
Yeah, if I could just respond specifically to your challenge around the road renewal and maintenance performance. So as you say, it was the SOI target was set, which was lower than what we need to maintain the network. So I think we've communicated a number of times to say, in terms of road resurfacing, we need to be doing 8 to 10% of the network each year to keep on top of it. So when we set an SOI target through funding of 5%, that's obviously not enough, and we're going to be building up, and we are building up a backlog. And to answer your question, it's probably looking like $1 billion over the next 10 years. We also then, given the different challenges that Dean's talked about around the capital funding constraints, we were asked to reduce the budget. So we reduced the budget in renewals, and however, through internal management, we've over-programmed to try and get to that 5% SOI target. Obviously, our road contractors and our own staff were significantly distracted during January and March in responding to the significant weather events, and we had to focus time and effort on that. That probably reduced our productivity over the year by 2 to 3 months, and that, along with the ongoing poor weather earlier in the year, is, other than funding, is the reason we haven't been able to achieve it. We put in a higher target this year. We have ramped up the industry with more gangs around the network to try and achieve that, and we're confident we can achieve the higher performance this year.
One final question, Dean. I accept that there is a political divergence, and we'll try and sort that out. But from your best judgment, is the first thing that we need to be doing is actually being stewards of our existing core assets first and maintaining them to a standard that is safe, as well as not causing a blowout in our future costs by not achieving the sort of targets, albeit very modest ones, which of course then bakes in a future liability.
I'd like to answer that in a couple of parts. First of all, the board's been very clear that we need to reprioritise investment in maintenance and renewals, and we agree with that. Secondly, we have a desire to continue a transport network and have a viable operating transport system. And so the board and myself and the team have been very clear that whilst we might reallocate funding to maintenance renewals, and that is a priority, we also have priorities around completing our network so people can move around Auckland. And so somehow we have to address both questions, how we prioritise, but also funding the system properly so we can deliver the outcomes. If we look at, sorry, I'll leave it there. It's a complex and very important issue.
Councillor Simpson.
Thanks, Chair. First of all, congratulations on getting the bus drivers back. I think that's made a huge difference to public transport. And again, I want to join with others in thanking you for the transport work you've done around FIFA. It's been outstanding getting to and from Eden Park. My question to you is, which of the funding shortfall projects have you put in writing to the community and promised to deliver this year?
Can we come back and confirm, because
I can tell you which one of them anyway.
Well, one of them, yes.
Okay, so I'm going, for my benefit of my colleagues, I'm talking about the southern connection to the GI to Tamaki. because Auckland Transport wrote to myself and the local board in March promising that this project would be delivered in conjunction with the closing of the Eastern Line. It's a project that has to go across the railway line, through the railway line. Eastern Line is closed, so in March they wrote and said the project was going to be delivered to coincide with the closing of that line. Second to that, there was a large community meeting. This is one of these cycling projects that's 100% supported. No one doesn't want it to happen. And the local board checked in with Auckland Transport to check that the delivery of this project would happen while the Eastern Line was closed, which it is now, so that what they verbally said at this public meeting would be correct. And Auckland Transport's response was yes, it would be constructed August, September. So my question to you is, what do you think the reputational risk is of putting things like that in writing, allowing your information to go to members of the local board that talk to the community, and then turning around today and saying potentially those projects are 2 years away? What's the reputational risk factor for you?
Of course it's a reputational risk, but and I acknowledge that, and we've had a number of discussions, and you have with the team around this. Between that, those commitments, which we always want to live up to, and I reassure Aucklanders that is the case, we've also had some significant changes in our funding. And we've absorbed $125 to $150 million worth of stormwater repair work is associated with the flooding. So our world has changed, and unfortunately we've had to go back and review how we allocate the funding. And it's not easy, and none of us want to go there, okay? So I recognise the risk. I'm disappointed that we are there. We are sorry for it, but we also need to manage some very, very real pressures, and we've just had one on maintenance renewals across the network.
So what will be the additional funding that will be required to complete this project if you have to stop the rail network? I mean, the whole purpose of doing this at the time when the network was down was to make it cost effective, but the risk to transport in Auckland, stopping the Eastern Line to do a project because you're not doing it when it was closed, which was what it's intent to do, what's that cost?
If we don't do it during the current closure, then we will be doing it through other planned closures that QRL will be doing. So, for example, over the Christmas block of lines, we will have to look at a different methodology to do the underpass, which is exactly what we did at Parnell Station, which was through a Christmas block of line. I can't give you a definitive answer compared to the 21 million that we had in the budget to do it now versus doing it over a longer period, but in a staged approach. But we are looking at that design option now, and I can come back to you on a difference in price.
Yeah, respectfully, I think you've made a mistake on this one.
Councillor Darby.
Yeah, hats off to you, Dean, and Wayne, board driving management to resolve the bus driver issue. Dean, when you came in, you said to me, we should have that solved by August, September, Chris. And I just suppressed my next question. But you hit it. Good on you. I also want to acknowledge the work you've done with the former Minister of Transport, Michael Wood, who was, he worked on that with us in many ways, with his immigration hat on as well, and funding, of course. So it was a collaborative effort, but that is an enormous achievement. Councillor Hills and I won't be in your inbox as much as we were, but we'll probably be there on ferries, Stacey. But look, thank you. Hey, look, Wayne, I've probably got one for you, and it's related to the topic we're discussing about, crossings, rail crossings, and our program there. And if I think about a project like the CRL, there's expectation of that big project that it's going to be delivered with all its parts in place. And that all its parts in place contribute to the BCR, the benefits that were identified in the business case. And there appears to be a risk that we may get to handover and then people riding the network and those benefits possibly won't be achieved unless we cough up with the funding from wherever. So I guess, Wayne, I mean, can you just give us a sense of how big some of these issues are of the funding not being there to cement, to lock in all the benefits that the business cases assumed would be there? And it's maybe not just CRL, but it's maybe
We've got a question
number of
coming,
other
Councillor Darby.
projects. And does it extend to Waka Kotahi projects as well?
Thank you for your question, Councillor Darby. It's a subject that's under constant watch by the Auckland Transport Board. I suppose personally I start from the perspective that I've worked in transport a long time, and every time there's been an improvement in rail, patronage has exceeded expectations every time. So I suppose first concern, first up, is that we're underestimating what could happen and what the uptake would be. The risks that we are currently seeing is that KiwiRail may be unable to complete the current renewal rebuild program in time for CRL because it's costing more and there are funding issues. There is a risk that KiwiRail are not going to be funded to do the business as usual renewal of the network that's set up post CRL. There is a risk that we might not be able to run the metro timetables that we could because freight's going to conflict with metro, and that means more extra lines and things like that. And around those things, I think you're soon going to see some work we're doing for KiwiRail or with KiwiRail on a long-term business case of what actually needs to happen to the Auckland rail network to meet the demand that we believe will come from CRL. In fact, it's disappointing that there's a lot of talk about harbour crossings and light rails and things, and there's actually a mega project sitting there that no one's talking about, which is called the heavy rail system. Where do I go from there? Level crossings, Mark's described to you. We'll get over the line on, I think, through the safety cases, the rest of it. My real concern is that any grade separated crossings involving traffic are expensive to do. They take a long time to plan, they take a long time to consent and go through the process, and we might well find ourselves behind the 8 ball of holding up growth and patronage on the Auckland rail system because they are not coming forward fast enough. I mean, I could go on for ages on this subject, but that gives you a thumbnail sketch of what keeps me awake.
It might just be useful if we have a quick update from the director here with respect to the number of questions that are coming through, because this is going to be addressed at the next meeting. Barry, would you just quickly say a few words on that?
Thank you, Chair. And next month's agenda for this committee includes on an update from CRLL, and we will have Auckland Transport and KiwiRail here to address these questions. And as Mark said, Auckland Transport specifically are preparing a presentation update paper on the forward program associated with CRL over what's required on day 1, out to year 5, and then way out into the future. So some of these questions, if we could hold there.
I'll be happy to pick it up there then. Just 2 quick ones then. On the parking tariff, the base parking tariff, what year or possibly decade was that last increased, the base parking tariff? And the second question for you, Stacey, last time we had you here, I was talking about that non-reporting rate that hospitals get. Is that something, and I think the ratio was like 6 or 8 to 1 or something like that. Is that something that is going to be shown in future safety data? Because the multiple is quite extreme.
I'll go first. Thank you, Councillor. Yes, you will. So we have recently started some work to actually bring in different data sets. So the ACC data, the Ministry of Health data, and looking to see how we can also support that with St John's data, so that we actually get the wholesome sort of picture of that. Can we use the multipliers in terms of determining other things? Yes. The key point I do stress about the safety data, and that's something that does need to be understood better, is that it is lag data. It is things that have happened. These are things that have happened, and you're not actually quantifying in terms of the safety issues or potentials in terms of what I would call people not doing stuff because it's unsafe. Yeah. So it is very much a lag measure, and yes, there is substantial underreporting. Bringing in those will give us a bit more of a realistic, I guess, understanding, and hopefully we can get regionality and locality on that. And if anything, it will help have better conversations on how we tackle the problem. Thank you.
Right, we have another big tranche of councillors coming here. Start off with Councillor Fully, Henderson, Dalton, Ferry, Amir Brown, Councillor Walker and Councillor Hills. Councillor Fully.
Kia ora, thank you, Chair, and thank you, Dean and the team, for all of the work that you've been doing, most recently with the bus issues, but also, of course, with FIFA, as others have acknowledged. My first question is around the maintenance contracts, and thank you for your kōrero around that. What I didn't hear, though, was anything around the social procurement targets. Are those still there? Is that still part of our contracts in general, or not? And if they are, what sort of targets or social procurement targets were required of those companies or groups that were then granted those contracts? I'm just mindful that those targets were ways that we can help to ensure that as many jobs as possible are given to locals, to Māori, to Pacific, to youth, to women, etc. Kia ora. And then I have one other question, Chair.
Thank you. I can address those through the sustainability KPIs that were set in those maintenance contracts. There were two areas that we're looking at. One is looking at diversity of ownership of the businesses. Are we working with Māori and Pacifica businesses in terms of ownership? And then how are we encouraging our contractors to employ and train, in particular Māori and Pacifica staff, and bring them on board? So there are specific targets set around those in each of those maintenance contracts, and they're being tracked. I can bring you further data on that if you're interested.
Yes, please. I would be really interested in that. Kia ora. Thank you. My second question is around the slide 10, the environmental scorecard, and it's good to see that. Just a question around the cover, tree cover. We've got the Urban Ngahere program that's been going on and happening across all of our local boards for some years, and I'm mindful that my ward, the two local boards have the lowest tree cover, and I think Manurewa is not far behind that. So in terms of the target that you've set there for ourselves, where, in terms of that equity lens, could you explain a little bit further about how that extra planting is being planned with that lens being applied to it?
Absolutely. So the target we've set in Hekina Te Wero, the Environment Action Plan for AT, is strongly aligned with the Urban Ngahere strategy that Council has. The Urban Ngahere strategy is a longer term strategy. Ours runs for 10 years, and so we've chosen an interim target. We've taken ours to focus primarily on the road corridor, so the 12% is for canopy cover within the street or road network, whereas Urban Ngahere strategy from Council covers the local board area more generally, including parks and reserves areas. And it is well acknowledged that South Auckland has a very low canopy cover, averaging particularly around 8%. And I'm working with the Parks Department and Community Facilities within Council now to identify ecological corridors and using the climate targeted rate for deliberately increasing the planting in those areas.
Kia ora. Thank you for that. Thank you, Chair.
And thank you, Councillor Fully. I appreciate the way you framed your questions there. That's very helpful. Councillor Henderson.
Thank you. I've got 4 questions, but I'll try and be as quick as I can. Thanks, Chair. Just quickly on road maintenance contracts, this is kind of a minor question, but we have southern rural and northern rural. West Auckland is actually mostly rural in terms of land mass. It's something like 60% or something like that. Why was the decision made to make West one region when they actually have very different needs relative to rural and urban areas?
I think that I need to come back to you on the detail, but I think that West contract is mostly focused on the rural area, and a lot of the central falls, the urban part falls into the central contract, but I need to come back to you.
Interesting, thank you. So some of these shortfall cycling projects, I'm going to jump around a little bit here. They're actually urban renewal projects as well as transport projects. So in what way are you coordinating with Panuku's regeneration program to actually deliver things together as part of a joint unit?
Where Panuku has urban regeneration initiative, of course we align with them as we do with Kaingaora. So, and a very real work in progress would be Eastern Busway as an example, where we bring cycling outcomes, urban regeneration and transport outcomes together into the one program, and Panuku's a very live part of that. So, the only other comment I want to make is that I see this as a very strong and very important way forward. Transport's an enabler for other outcomes, of which Panuku is a very important part.
Thank you. Two more, thanks, Chair. We're talking about finances and the like, and it being a real handbrake on what we can do, so to speak. In what ways are Auckland Transport identifying value for money opportunities and efficiencies within the organisation?
It's significant and ongoing, and we just delivered circa $35 million worth of savings for this budget, and that required us to sadly allow 142 people to leave Auckland Transport. That's at the operating cost end. We are examining, not quite line by line, but we're examining value for money and opportunities for greater efficiency through our entire capital procurement program. And I know that Mark Lang came to you and said if we could get air cover for $50 million more worth of investment this year and $100 million the next year, everything we're doing is lining up to see if we can, through value for money in our capital program, reduce that. So that we don't come and say, oh, actually, we've spent 50 million more. We want to say, actually, whilst we needed the air cover for 50 million more, we found value for money through our capital procurement program and we delivered it for less, so therefore the overspend is 5 or 10 million. So everything we do is driving at this, and we'll increasingly focus on that. It's a very important question.
Thank you. Last question, I think maybe the most important. DSI data, look, it continues to worsen. We have more and more people not coming home from work or coming home to see their families month on month. What is the plan? We've talked about the problem, but we haven't talked about a plan to turn it around. What is the plan to turn this around? And looking at things like targets and lowering them or raising them, you know, what's the plan to stop people dying on our roads?
Thank you, Councillor. Look, we have a robust plan, a very, very robust plan. There does require what I was suggesting before, some real tough decisions to be made in order to make that plan happen. And I think that's the key thing. So obviously we have Kataoka Ora out for consultation at the moment. That's one lever. But we also have the fines and penalties review. So obviously, just like our parking, our road fines for speeding, etc., are substantially tiny in comparison to others. They haven't been reviewed for many, many years. There's also the drug testing, increased enforcement. We've got point-to-point cameras, which is just going through the legislation. A huge, what I'd call, determinant in terms of modifying behaviour on our roads. So it's not just one thing, there's many other things, and it's also leveraging what we can do with other partners. We're just one part of it. We work very closely with NZ Police, ACC, MOH. There's many in terms of the team trying to solve this problem, but there are some really meaty decisions out there that need to get across the line.
Councillor Henderson, Councillor Dalton.
Thank you very much, and congratulations on your performance measures and your patronage and reliability. It's easy for everyone to forget the long haul back from COVID impacts, right? I agree with your request for air cover too, but I'll talk about that later. 3 questions. How much of the DSI budget had to be cut? That must have been a heartbreaking decision for you, Stacey.
What we did was we sort of re-baselined it, so we had it going a lot faster in terms of that 2050 where we wanted to achieve. So yeah, it was, but the target that we actually had this year, in fairness, was already above or below where we were in terms of at the start time. So it was unrealistic from the get-go, and I think that's the thing. It's an aspirational target. It needed to be re-baselined, because if you're asking people to continually focus on something and the goals, you know, way up here where they can't achieve it, and you don't have the investment coming in, all the decisions, if everything was timetabled as planned in terms of getting some of those things across the line, I think we could get there.
So to clarify, it's about funding and investment, which every question that's been asked of you, why, it's because we're not funding, right? So the funding is the primary issue around DSI. My second question is around cycling projects. They have the smallest budget out of the whole Auckland Transport budget. Is there an emission assessment done around the projects that you do decide to cut? So we know we've got to reach some targets. We cut these cycling projects to do renewals on roads. Is there an emission assessment done on the outcome that's going to get us closer to our emission targets?
By project, look, so emissions reduction is a core part of how we think about every investment. That's the first point. Second point is, if I look across the capital program, it is dominated by public transport investment, supporting CRL, supporting Eastern Busway, completing network investments on a range of Northwestern Busways and Northern Busway and Penlink. Okay, so everything we're doing is looking to build out the public transport network, and that is the biggest lever we have in terms of reducing both vehicle kilometres travelled and emissions. Of course, these investments are part of that, no question, and so they're very important, but we literally can't do everything. And so can I come to you, or Mark, could we come to you with a specific emissions assessment on them? Probably not at the individual project level, but can I reassure you everything we're doing is delivering public transport outcomes, looking at BKT and emissions reduction, along with safety.
Thank you for that. Mark, this one might be for you. You know the Qatar cycling projects, that there was a list there of the projects and the revenue that's been allocated to them. We talked about how it gets harder the more years in we get. My question is, one of the projects up there is for Minirewa. That local board has rejected that cycling project. Does that money go to the next board on the list? Maybe you could come back to me on that. I just, you know, can it be absorbed into helping, or does it go to the next local board on the list for recycling? Who wants it? Lotu would like it.
Well, first of all, I think we're getting to the point on some of these projects where we're not going to keep pushing a project the local board doesn't want. That's the direction we've had from this committee. So at some point we might have to walk away from that project. How you reallocate your funding, I probably need to ask Mark or council as to what the rules are around that, to be honest.
Yeah. Can I just add to it? Look, this is a very important issue that we've been debating internally, Councillor Dalton. And there is the Local Board Capital Transport Fund, which is one component of it, where there is direct control by the local board with matching funding as required. And then there are other investments in local board areas, and the model shift that we're talking through, and it's worth sharing this because I've certainly talked about it with local board chairs, is we will be looking through local board transport plans, which we'll do in partnership with each of the local boards, to look at what the investment opportunities are in those areas for transport outcomes. Could be where a bus service goes, could be a capital project, place-making elements to it. If we've got a program funding base and a local board or a community isn't ready for that investment because the consensus isn't there, we will reallocate that, and it might be to do with safety improvements, or it could be a cycling improvement project. We will look to reallocate that funding where there is ready acceptance across the community, because there are really important things to be done, and we will wait for communities to be ready as opposed to force things on communities, which has been part of the methodology in the past, okay? So it is coming, but it needs to be thought through and nuanced.
So, reserve my right to speak, please.
Oh, okay, sure. Okay, thanks, Councillor Dalton. Councillor Ferry and then Mayor Brown.
Kia ora, thank you. Two bouquets to start with. This report, great to have it back on the published agenda and available, very thorough and timely. Thank you for that. And also just to point out the really good information we've had from Richard Harrison and previously from Stephen Rainbow about the public transport figures, and love to see that continue. It's been really useful to get a picture of how we're doing, not just with the drivers, but also more broadly. So I've got a few questions. I'm probably just going to truncate them and send a few by email, but just first in relation to some of the work around landslides and that kind of stuff, the flooding work impact. You mentioned in there that on page 6 that we'd spent 125 to 150 million on flooding work. I think it's in there. Yes, second bullet point. So did we not get any support from central government for any of that from Waka Kotahi?
Thank you for the question, Councillor. So that's the number that's in our budget for this year. So what was approved in the council budget was, well, the one that was approved in June was 150. At the moment, and this is the CapEx piece, we're still working through exactly what the far as we get on that. On the OPEX piece, we were getting 91%. This one gets slightly confusing. To the extent it's above our normal baseline, I think it's 5% above our, no, 10% above our normal baseline, it kicks in at a higher far. So we will get in round numbers, about 60% of that, or 65%, should be funded by central government. The caveat on that is that's in theory what we would get according to the funding rules, but Waka Kotahi is still not sure if they've got enough, they've been actually physically handed enough money out of the pot from central government to actually cover all the work that they need to do nationally, because there's obviously bids on that money coming from all the regions, particularly the Hawke's Bay. So in theory, 60% of it's funded by central government, if the pot is big enough.
Okay, when will we have an idea on that? Is that part of the negotiations that are underway with central government, or is this a separate process?
I think that's, so the GPS I think might be coming out today. It might be covered in that, it might not.
Okay, cool.
But again, I think it sits in a pot that's outside of the classic GPS funding pots. Whether it's mentioned or not today, I'm not sure. But I guess the other key thing just to note in that area is a lot of the numbers around flood response nationally are still a bit of a thumbsuck.
Yeah.
I mean, in the Hawke's Bay, they're literally going, we think it could be $1 billion or $2 billion, you know, and so that's part of the challenge people are working through. But we'd like to think that we get 60% with this. It's more that in the following years, unless more money's tipped in, we could run out of central government funding contribution, which would be a further conversation.
Yeah, okay. I think that has, that's important context given the third bullet point there and the implications on other projects. So when we talk about the committed projects, and acknowledging we did ask you for more information about cycling projects, so I know that's why we've got more information about that today. But putting it up in this context does make it look a little bit like everything, you know, cycling is here in lights, and here's a list of the projects, but you haven't given us any information about the other ones. So it would be helpful to understand more what the spending is on other modes. So for example, on page, where am I? Page 7, which I think is 2 pages on, 1 page on. You've got that, you've got committed projects on critical path, asset management. I imagine there's a lot of different modes being served in there, but then we have got a line that's cycling and corridor improvement. It gives the impression, so I'd appreciate a bit more nuance with that in the future.
Certainly. 2 comments. One is we have actually, I think, shared the detail previously, but it gets very detailed very quickly. we were going to suggest, and more than happy to take councillors through a workshop on what the capital program is, so you can see what is being proposed. So that might be helpful. And the third comment was my suggestion to Mark that we crunch this down. Otherwise, we put so much information it's hard to conceive of it all, and we just went for consolidated lines.
Yeah.
But all the information is available. It's all been prioritised, and that's what we're working to. And today we just wanted to out the challenge around those small projects and programs of which cycling is part.
Yeah, and look, I really appreciate that, because I mean, even if it's just a pie chart that